Hello, world. Welcome to the MHFi podcast. My name is Carl, and I'm here with my podcast partner.
Doug Cunnington.
Yeah, so Doug, today we're going to talk about a subject near and dear to my heart, and it's cars. And I say near and dear because growing up, my dad was always a big car person, and as a kid, I remember him teaching me about cars. Like he teach me to identify cars. Like, okay, what kind of car is that? And I have to answer right. Like, okay, Dad, that's a '57 Chevy because the taillights are this and this. So I've always loved cars, which I think is a bit of a detriment to a fire life. But with that said, are you a car guy, Doug, or have you obsessed with cars your whole life like I have?
Kind of similar to what you said. My dad was into cars and he worked at a gas station growing up and had pride in fixing cars and changing his own oil and stuff like that. So I think just because of that, I sort of, just like you said, would look at cars and try to know the name and the model and the year, all those details. And I was really into cars until really I started to, have to buy them and then realized how expensive it could be. But yeah, I have enjoyed them quite a bit and sort of pulled back, like you said, if you are aiming to like this sort of fire life, cars can be an expensive piece of the puzzle if you don't, do it right or don't understand the trade-offs that you have to, approach cars with.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into it, do you have a dream car? Like when you were a kid, did you have a picture of a Lamborghini or Ferrari, a 40 on your walls? Or
I didn't obsess that much, but I think once I got into cars and I was probably like a teenager, a BMW M3 was sort of like a modern classic car that I thought was fantastic. It hit the German luxury area and it was fast and well engineered and all those things. So I remember seeing some of those when I maybe interned in college. So a handful of them were in the parking lot, and there was, occasionally you see the one of the vice presidents would drive their Lotus or something exotic on Fridays when the weather was nice or something. But yeah, BMW M3. How about you?
That's an interesting question. There's a couple. I guess the interesting thing is I actually owned it. It was an Acura NSX. So sports cars for the longest time weren't that well built. They were unreliable. They cost you a ton of money to own. And then Acura came out with this thing called the NSX, which was a sports car that could keep pace with the Lamborghinis and Ferraris at the time, but had Honda reliability and borrowed actually a lot of parts from the Honda parts bin. So if you had this thing, it wasn't that expensive to maintain. It was a little bit more to insure. We had one for a while. But yeah, it was a great, reliable car, and people actually used these things as a daily driver, which is unheard of with most sports cars. Like you don't see many Porsches in a snowstorm, but I knew a guy who would drive his Acura all year long. He would commute to Denver in this thing, which I personally wouldn't do. But there you have it. Maybe we'll talk about my ownership of this a little bit later, but it wasn't all I thought it would be.
Side question. How fast did you go? What was the fastest you went in that car? Did you ever get it out to the track or anything like that?
Unfortunately, I like driving on racetracks, and I've done that before, but I never made it to a racetrack with this. It did see... I don't think I ever got it over to 100, but oh, Doug, I almost got. I was on the Peak to Peak Highway, which is this beautiful highway up in the foothills, and I was pushing 100. You could go pretty fast in that thing, pretty quickly and effortlessly. So I remember looking at the speedometer. I'm going 95, and I was with another friend. I'm like, you know what? I better lay off the gas. So I did. Got back down to 55. And then a police car passed me like,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that would have been not a good outcome. And I do not advocate driving fast. The few times I ever did this was in very low traffic situations. Still dangerous and very stupid. If a deer or moose would have popped out, I probably would have been dead. But I do not advocate that. But yeah, most of the time I was pretty conservative.
So you only got it up to about 100?
Yeah, only 100.
Oh, man. I was going to say, and we'll talk about my vehicle. I've had my truck to 95.
Wow.
I mean, so I'm a little disappointed to hear that now that you don't own it anymore, but safety first, everyone. But at the same time, it's Come on, man. You had like a very fast car. Like,
I know, right? I should have pushed it. I'm sorry to let you down, Doug.
well, I like the conservative approach and the safe approach. I mean, that's more my style these days. Although it wasn't that long ago when I got to 95. Okay. So thanks
Yeah.
for the detour on that one. And I guess we're going to get into what we're driving now. So do you want to kick it off and talk about what we're driving now? And I like the way you form this outline too.
Yeah, so neither Doug and I drive very I don't know what terminology should be, like fire responsible cars or maybe fire approved cars. Because you look online, and if you're Mr. Money Mustache, you should ride a bike everywhere or walk. If you have to have a car, it's going to be some old shitty Honda Civic or some old crap thing. And neither of us, we both have older cars, but you have a full size pickup truck, Doug.
I do. Yeah. I have a Ford F-150. It's a 2005. And yeah, I love it. It has a V8. So I'm violating so many rules. It's very wasteful. It's big. And I mean, I have ways to justify it, but I mean, anyone can justify just about anything if they review certain facts and ignore others. But yeah, I like American cars. I know they weren't as reliable, but we grew up driving Fords, so I like to have a Ford if I can. And then we had pickups here and there. I mean, we lived in the suburbs, but we always had a pickup, and it's good to know someone with a pickup for when you have to move a couch or do something. And I enjoy having it.
Yeah, sorry, Doug. I'm going to continue to throw you under the
Yeah.
bus, the pickup truck a little bit here, but and don't judge me when I ask. You're going to throw this back in my face when I actually ask you to borrow, and I need to go pick up a couch. Shit, I just thought of this. Maybe I should shut up. Nah, I'm going to go for it.
Let's do it.
What percentage of time do you haul stuff in the back of your pickup truck? And groceries are not included. If you've got like a roll of paper towels in back, that doesn't count. I'm talking about rocks, my couch in about a week or two, or some other heavy shit. How many times a year do you use it to haul stuff?
Probably less than 2%. I mean, almost never, right?
Okay.
From a practical standpoint, almost never.
Oh, Doug. But I can't really throw you under the bus too much because I own an SUV. It's a small one. It's a Honda Element, but still it gets like 22 or 24 miles to the gallon. That has all the aerodynamics of a brick. I mean, this is not probably the greatest fire car. And we bought a new, which you didn't do. At least you bought yours used. We bought this thing new. It was like $19,000. And I guess we've bought two cars new, but that was the most expensive new car we've ever built. I probably haul stuff a little bit more than you in the thing, like just because I'm doing a lot of home construction and you aren't. But I'm thinking it won't even fit my couch. So, Doug, yeah, I'll be contacting you. I guess you might be out of town. But when you come back from town, I will ask
sure.
you for a favor.
I'll just leave you the keys. You can watch out for it. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, sometimes when I see the huge flaw in the logic. I haul things occasionally, and like I have the option if I need to, but I almost never do that. And I mean, people do that all the time. It's sort of like insurance, right? Like you don't need it most of the time.
Sure.
But when you have it, that like justifies the 99% of the time that I don't need the bed of my truck.
Yep.
So
one cool thing about your truck, and one thing I will compliment you on, is it's from 2005. So quick math, that's 16 years old. And as we discussed before the show, it was built in 2004. So it's probably more like it's about to turn 17 if it has not already. I read something, and correct me if you've heard different, but I think the average person in America keeps their cars 7 years. Which sounds about right. So you've more than doubled that.
yeah, and I haven't seen otherwise, but yeah, that does seem about right. You know, it starts getting a few more miles. Maintenance is a little more expensive. You have to replace a couple more things that potentially are more expensive. So yeah, that makes sense to me. You know, 7 years, someone's like, maybe it's time to upgrade. And I've, reached that point. I don't have a ton of miles on the truck, of only about 130,000 or so. And, you reach that point. I recently had some maintenance done. I neglected it, unfortunately. So I had like $2,000 worth of work done, and it is cheaper, right? So from a financial standpoint, I was thinking, oh, I could buy a new car, even though I probably don't drive enough to warrant it. But a new car, even if I got a used old car, it would be way more expensive than $2,000 of maintenance, and I can keep, moving forward with my, very old truck.
Yep.
So,
yeah, I've had that same thought. Our helmet needed a new radiator recently. I didn't feel like doing it, so I paid someone, and I think I was cursing at the time. It was like $500. Like, oh, geez, I got to pay $500 for this. But it's one of the only times we've ever had to pay to have the thing fixed. So at almost 20 years of ownership, that's it. And that's a lot of people who buy new cars have payments that are more than that per month. And the other aspect I want to ask you about this, Doug, after I tell you what we do for this, but insurance. After a car is paid off, you don't have to have all the comprehensive insurance that covers you. I think that I'm using the right term. The insurance that covers you if you were to cause the accident. So our cars are both old and they're shitty. So they're not worth much. So if we crashed them, they would probably be totaled and that would be it. So we have the very minimal liability insurance or whatever the law requires you to have. And I think both our cars are like $600 or $800 for the entire year to insure. Very cheap. How about you? Do you have full insurance or do you go with a smaller amount?
Exactly what you said. So we have kind of a newer CRV as well, a Honda CRV. And when it was more valuable, when it was newer, we had whatever the comprehensive and collision. I always get them mixed up, but we had more insurance on that car. But now that it's, much older, 100,000 miles, we just have the minimum insurance. So yeah, it's roughly, $500 $500 each. So $1,000 total for our household.
Sure.
For auto insurance.
Yeah. I think the other value in having an old car is, don't get me wrong, I like to keep my car up. I maintain it very well. And I haven't washed it in a while. I used to do that pretty religiously, but they both look kind of shitty now. But when I had the Acura NSX and I went to the grocery store, I would park that thing in another county because I didn't want someone to open a door or some kid to shove a shopping cart into it or something like that. So I probably got way more steps, and so that was probably actually a benefit. But with our current cars, they're old and they're dirty. If someone opens the door and dings it, I'll be mad, but more for them not caring about my car than our car actually getting a ding. But they're old, so there's value to that. It doesn't really.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to some of the other conversations, maybe the happiness one, where if someone opens the door into my car, it's probably going to hurt their car more than mine, number one. And it doesn't really matter. I've gotten that first scratch or the first dent a long time ago. In fact, when I bought it, it was already sort of scratched up, and you're past that. You don't stress about like that ding or whatever. In fact, I remember someone left a note on my car that they did some damage to it, like a cart hit it. I looked all around. I couldn't find anything. So I never called them or checked on what it was that they did, because I couldn't find it. I still, to this day, it's been like 10 years. I have no idea what they did. I think the cart maybe just like slammed into it or something, but it was fine. It was fine.
That's awesome. So Doug, before we get, I want to talk about the cost of cars, but before we get into that, you said you're a pickup truck fan. Surely you've seen a picture of the new Tesla Cybertruck. Do you know what this thing looks like? Or
I've seen a couple. I haven't like looked too carefully.
Okay.
But
it's very controversial, and it looks kind of like a big wedge. Like there's no curves in the body at all. It is all right angles and stainless steel, like the old DeLorean. So yeah. What do you think of this thing?
I'm not a fan from what I've seen so far. I'm sure they'll change it up a little bit, but maybe they'll stick to it. And I like some of the classic antique trucks as well. You see like some older trucks from the 60s or 70s. They look great, especially if they're, well taken care of and all that. And yeah, so not a huge fan. Of the Tesla version of the pickup. It'll be interesting. And I think Ford has some electric version of the F-150 coming out as well. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah, I have. I think it's coming out next year too. I'm trying to think of, I was just reading about it. I'm trying to think of how much it's going to cost. But yeah, it should be interesting. Would you consider an electric Ford F-150? I'm not saying next year, but if you could get a used one in 10 years, is that something you would
Oh yeah,
consider?
you know what? I would take a look at it, but also there's a good chance we wouldn't need two vehicles. So if my truck completely died, I probably would, because we don't drive that much. I mean, I think that's one of the punchlines we'll hit eventually here, but I think I'm putting like under 2,500 miles per year on my truck, and it has been like that for years. So, yeah, so I'll talk more about that. All that to say, sure, if Ford comes out and I could get it for a reasonable price, it could be a pretty fun piece of technology. I mean, currently it's a pretty bare bones truck that I drive, so some modern technology would be very welcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I got to go off on one more tangent and then we'll get to the meat. I apologize, listeners. I just like cars a lot. Have you been to the Shelby Museum, kind of Ford related, and outside of Boulder there with they've
No.
got some of the original GTs and Shelby Cobras.
No, I
No,
haven't.
it's only $5 to get in. You should check it out. So I'm a car guy. Do you know what the Ford GT is? GT Ford?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, they came out with a new one. I actually sent an email to Ford wanting to buy the thing, and they never responded. But then it came out, and it was like $400,000. So, but it turns out people are paying over $1 million. So, if they would have sold me one, and if I would have bought it, it probably would have been a good, same investment within the same line as cars is always a dangerous thing, but it would have actually been a good investment. But yeah, go to the if you're into old Shelby Cobras and GTs, Mustangs, they've got a bunch of them down there. Only $5 to get in. It's
That's awesome.
yeah, frugal Friday.
Next time my dad's in town, he would love to check it out. I'm glad you mentioned it because I had no clue.
Yeah.
Is Shelby like from around here or something?
I don't think so. I don't remember how that museum got started, but it's revolving cars, but they have some original Shelby Cobras. There's one that's the new trend in cars is not to restore them, to kind of leave them in their original form. And they've got a Shelby Cobra there, or they did when I was there, that still had dirt on it from its racing days.
Oh, really? Nice.
It's probably a multi-million-dollar vehicle at this point. Yeah, pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah, let's talk about the cost of cars.
All right. Well, you outlined the true cost of owning your Mazda 5, and I like followed along and calculated everything, which I've never done before. So I'll let you talk about your sort of case study for the Mazda 5.
Yeah, this actually surprised me, and I'll tell you why. I want to go through my expenses really quick. This was a Mazda 5, which is a little minivan. My wife's name is Mindy, so I call it the Mindy van. She doesn't like that too much, but so be it. So we bought this thing in 2010. It was around $17,000. We've put $2,000 of tires on it, roughly 5 new sets of tires. I've spent about $18,000 in fuel. This one kind of was surprising, more than the car costs. It's got 180,000 miles, so I calculated my fuel at $2.50. So we've bought 7,200 gallons of fuel. We spent $600 on oil changes, and this is mostly because I use synthetic oil, which is fancier and costs more, but I do them myself. It would probably be at least double that if I paid for oil changes, especially the synthetic. I've done all the maintenance on it myself. The interesting thing about this car is despite the almost 200,000 miles, it's never had a problem except for brakes. I've done the brakes on it once, the front once, and I just did the rear a couple months ago. And it's a stick shift. It's never had a clutch. The clutch is still fine on it. And the insurance I calculated at about $500 per year because we did finance it. We had to have more expensive insurance when we initially bought it. But yeah, the total, if you add everything up, it came out to about $44,000 or about 24.5 cents per mile. And I know that's way less. What does the IRS give you? I think 56 cents per mile.
I think that's right. Yeah.
But I actually thought my per mile cost would be less because it was a cheaper car to begin with. I think even back then in 2010, $17,000 was probably lower than average. It's a cheap car to begin with. The maintenance is very minimal. It doesn't need a timing belt like some cars do. And I've done everything myself. So I thought it would actually be cheaper. I was surprised by how much it was. And I thought that 56 cents per mile number was kind of crazy, but I'll bet that's probably pretty accurate, especially now. I think the average new car costs around $30,000. So I was a bit surprised. at how much I've spent per mile on it. And,
Sure.
and after I did this calculation a couple of days ago, I'm like, shit, I need to get on my bike or walk more, because this is like $1 for every 4 miles, which it isn't much, but it still hurts a little bit. I could buy I don't know, I could buy a hot dog from Costco with $1.50 so for every 6 miles of driving, I could buy a hot dog and they give you the drink too. That's lunch, Doug, lunch. So
Yeah. Well, the bad part is the Costco's so far from here, you'll be spending even more just to get over there.
Shit, I got to ride my bike over there.
And then, yeah, it was very interesting to see the true calculations, and I ran through with mine as well. And there'll be, some stark differences. And quick note: so you put 180,000 miles on it. You bought it new in 2010, so it's about 11 years old.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So my truck is a 2005. I bought it with about 30,000 miles on there. I think I paid about $12,500, and this was before I knew anything about finance. And I mean, I was a couple years out of school at that point.
Do you remember how much it would have cost new if you had bought it new?
Oh, I think it was probably like 22 or 24,000, something like that.
Steep discount.
Yeah, trucks are pretty expensive, more expensive than you would think, because I always thought, oh yeah, cheap little old pickup truck, which, I mean, I guess if you look around, you can get a smaller one, but they were pretty expensive. So I didn't calculate how much the additional cost from interest and having a loan was, but I paid it off a little early once I kind of got a hold of everything. For tires, I usually get fairly cheap tires. I think I've had a couple sets on. It needs tires now, so I spent about $1,000 on that. I spent, just rough calculation, about $15,600 on 6,250 gallons of fuel. Same approximation as Carl gave. Oil changes roughly $600, so calculated every 5,000 miles, and 20 changes roughly at $30 a piece. I don't do my own maintenance or anything like that. Just pay someone to get their hands dirty. And brakes and other maintenance. So $4,000 there. Like I said, I spent about $2,000 recently, and just over time, brake job here, replace fluids, something or other here and there. No major issues with it. For insurance, roughly $7,500. Same sort of calculation as Carl, $500 a year, and I've had the car for a little bit longer. So the total is $41,225, or roughly $2,750 per year, and that is 41.2 cents per mile, which is what is that, like 40% higher than what you calculated for your car on a per mile basis.
Were those numbers surprising to you, or were they about what you expected? Or
they were, you know what, I had no expectation, and I thought, well, it's less than the IRS, 56 cents per mile. It's more than yours, which makes sense because it's a bigger car. I didn't do my own maintenance. I didn't do like any of the things that you could like really save money on. I have not paid attention to. So yeah, I guess I don't have a strong impression one way or another, because I didn't have any clue. I never even calculated or thought about calculating the total cost of owning a car.
Okay. One interesting thing about these numbers is they should continue to go down over time as we keep our cars, and that initial purchase price fades into the past. We don't drive that much, so that number is going to slowly go down, which is makes a strong case for keeping these vehicles for as long as we can, as long as they don't have major issues or start going crazy.
And the part that I have looked at before, especially after I started saving, was around the, I guess, opportunity cost that you're giving up or that you have to consider if you buy a new car. So sure, you're getting something potentially that's fun, new technology, maybe a little safer. But when you look at investing that money, so I looked it up, the average used car payment in 2021 is roughly $400. So if you invested $400 every month for 10 years at an 8% return, it would be worth $73,000. And if you did the same thing for 15 years, that 8% return would be worth $138,000. Those are the time frames. So Carl has had his car for 10 years. I've had mine for 15. And sure, there's some assumptions in there, and we potentially paid some payments here or there, but roughly if you're investing instead of paying for a new car, maybe in the first couple of years, it doesn't make a huge difference, but 10, 15, 20 years down the line, like if I keep driving the shitty truck for a little while, for 5 more years, like compound interest really, really makes it a powerful case.
Yeah. So Doug, I'm trying to do these numbers in my head as I watch you. So you had an 8% return, which is doubling every 9 years per the rule of 72. So if you plan on keeping a car for, let's say, 36 years, that's 4 doublings. I mean, you're talking $1 million at that point just for keeping your old shitty car and driving it. $1 million just to drive the Honda Civic instead of whatever new car you might want. That's crazy. That's huge.
Yeah. And a theme that we've talked about, or a specific thing that we've talked about, is if you wanted to drive a car, or let's say I wanted to go to a racetrack, drive a BMW M3 or M5 or whatever I wanted to drive, I could probably afford it because I haven't, bought like new cars every few years or even every 7 years, which isn't, too crazy. No one would really be upset if I was like, I'm going to buy a new car every 7 years. But the point is, I could go drive awesome cars on a racetrack with like a helmet, safety mechanisms, go fast, do whatever, get it out of my system. And then I don't have to worry about someone opening their door into my M5 at Sam's or something like that. You don't have to worry about it.
I wonder how many M5s there are in the Sam's parking lot. I'll bet more than you think, because you spent all the money on the car, so now you need to save on the toilet paper.
That's true. But then when I don't know how much M5s cost these days, or M3s or whatever, but some of the full-size pickup trucks are insanely expensive. I mean, you're maybe paying, 50, 60, 70,000 for a big truck outfitted with everything. I mean, they're like luxury vehicles with a bed in the back.
Isn't that crazy? Like, I remember when I was a kid, my dad was a blue-collar construction guy, and like him and all his friends had pickup trucks, but they were filled in the back with tools and there was a cap on it. Now pickup trucks have conformed into status symbols. And I think this is a nice segue into what we're going to talk about next. Cars are interesting in that they've become this, I remember as a kid, BMWs were the ultimate driving machine. So you would buy a BMW, you'd have a stick shift, and that was to take on the track, or you could take corners hard with that, really good suspension and all that, fast engine. But now the same car is driven by people who I don't think appreciate the German engineering and handling characteristics. They've become like the pickup trucks, something you want to be seen in, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
So I mean, there's a lot of value in not giving a shit what you think other people think of what you drive. A ton of value if you're okay driving the Honda Civic. You might not look as cool to the neighbors, but if they're judging you that you drive the Honda Civic, I don't think they're worth your time anyway.
And it's really interesting because depending on where you live, the status symbols will be a little different for the vehicles, right? So I've lived in Georgia, the metro area there. So a lot of, the luxury German cars, that sort of thing. Some of the luxury Japanese cars, which we're going to talk about in a second here. But when I lived in Montana, then it was like the big pickup trucks. So not like my truck was a small one there. So like the average truck was like a 250 or 2500 size. And it was not unusual to see like the 350s and, even bigger, because people are using it to do ranch things and whatever. So yeah, it's very interesting. And your reference point and context and the framing of all this is like who you're hanging around with, So if we bumped into somebody and met them and they had like a super fancy car, we could appreciate the engineering, but probably, we're human. Probably we're going to think about judging them for having an expensive car because that, we have justified having our crappy cars. So like if you extend it, I'm speaking for you now, so correct me if I'm wrong, but if you extend it a little bit and then someone has a nice car, well, they're doing the opposite. So I think it's natural for people to judge. We're human. I'm just saying we're human. It's okay if you judge people. And I know other people judge us for driving what we drive.
Yeah.
So,
and I've had the expensive car, so I often judge myself and audience, you're free to judge me too. But the geographic status thing is an interesting point. I was listening to this other financial podcast called Animal Spirits, and they were having this exact same conversation. And one of the hosts of that show, Michael Batnick, lives in Long Island, and he was saying the status car there is a Land Rover. Everyone's got, I think he might have even said black Land Rovers. And then you think about California or Boulder, and it's that they call it the California Camry, which is a Tesla. So that is the status car in those. But here I'd say where we live, it's the pickup truck. In the Midwest, in Chicago, corporate America, it was the German car at the time. Okay. Mm-hmm. Kind of interesting. I told you the story how my boss told me I had to buy a different car if I ever wanted to get married. And the car I had to buy, according to her, if I ever wanted to attract a mate, was a BMW 3 Series. And she bought that. I didn't. She got a divorce. I'm not divorced. So she was a good person. If you're ever listening to this, old boss, I loved you. You were a great boss. But I'm sure maybe you wouldn't give that same advice now. But yeah.
Oh, yeah. So we were talking about sort of the status that one can obtain or that people are after from the cars. And you brought up a good point here in our outline about rebadging. So can you tell us about rebadging and like, what does that even mean?
Yeah. And I even owned a rebadged car myself. So this Acura NSX thing came out. It was a fancy sports car, but the interesting thing was it was only called the Acura NSX in North America. And so this car was made by Honda. So if you bought this thing in any other part of the world, it was called a Honda. So what I think the Japanese probably figured out sometime in the 80s is you could take a Honda. So I remember some of the original examples of this were the Honda Accord and the Toyota Camry. Oh, I've got a funny story to tell you about this. So I knew someone who had this car called a Lexus ES250. So this person comes to a party, and I'm standing there talking to a friend, and this person's like, "Hey, look at my new Lexus." And this other guy, who was much more abrupt and much less tactful than I am, says, "Well, that's actually just a Toyota." She's like, "No, it's a Lexus. It says Lexus right on there." He's like, "Well, what Toyota does is they take their Camry, they put leather seats in there, make it a little bit nicer, and then they take the Honda badge off, or they take the Toyota badge off it, they put a Lexus badge on it, and sell it to you for $10,000 more as a status symbol." And her response was, "But it's a Lexus," which I thought was kind of funny because in a lot of cases, that's what happens. The Honda Accord becomes an Acura TSX. Sometimes the engine will be a little bit tuned up, or it'll always have the fancy interior, maybe a fancier sound system, but the bones of it are the same basic car. And I always thought it was kind of amusing that when I'd see this and happen, including my wayward friend back in the day.
Right. When we have a Honda CRV 2011 and we were house sitting for some friends and they had an Acura, I think is it the RDX? Yeah, the RDX is a smaller one. So it's exactly what you're talking about. It's the same size. Everything is pretty much the same, but exactly what you said, right? So we just have a 4-cylinder. I don't even think we have like no options for the CRV as far as other engines. It's just like that 4-cylinder. And I think theirs either it was a 4-cylinder turbo it must have been a 4-cylinder turbo. So driving on the highway, huge difference, major difference in the amount of power. And, the CRV is fine. We like it. But when you do sit in the RDX, the Acura version, it was more comfortable, especially for long drives. Like everything just kind of fit together a little better. It felt and looked nicer. So I can appreciate, the difference in the luxury, and it all depends on what's valuable to you. But when we sat in their car, I was like, this is nicer. This is like clearly nicer. I don't know if it's worth, $18,000 more, or however much more it cost. But yeah, when I sat down, you could tell immediately, this is a more comfortable seat. This leather, much nicer. So
is your CRV, does it have a leather interior? Or?
It does, yeah. Leather interior, and Yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's like the EX 4-wheel drive or all-wheel drive rather. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I say this, we're probably going to get some mean comments. And for me being a judgmental asshole, and maybe I am, I'm probably willing to put up with more crap than the average person. I remember a neighbor got a car. I'm like, well, what happened with your other one? She's like, well, the heat went out and it would have cost like $1,000. And I didn't say this to her at the time, but I'm like, shit, I just would have like worn my jacket in the car. But I realize that's a compromise that most might not be willing to put up with. I think she should have just gotten fixed for the $800 or whatever it would have cost. But
That's cheaper than buying a new car, because you have to get potentially more expensive insurance. And yeah, I agree with you. So, okay.
I think your CRV, I think it's a nice segue to our next point, because one thing I think about cars is how much better they've gotten. Like, I was in the car one time and I think Mindy was next to me. So I did this symbol. I'm doing the rolling down the windows with your arm symbol. And my younger kid was like, Dad, what are you doing with your arm? I'm like, I'm rolling down the window. She's like, Dad, what does that mean? And I realized at that time, she's never seen a car that you have to do that roll down with the window thing. Like all cars, even the cheapest econo box you can buy, I think has the electric windows. And as a kid, my parents wouldn't buy cars with air conditioning because that was always an option too. But even the cheapest econo box now, as far as I know, is going to come with air conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
In your CRV, like the cheap Honda thing has leather seats, air conditioning, power windows, and all that. Like,
yeah. I mean, I feel like you're taking a jab at me here personally, but my F-150, it's more like a work truck. It's a STX trim line, so that's pretty low. I think there's only one more below it. And so I don't have power locks or power windows in my truck.
Wait, Doug, you actually have to reach over if you want to lock and that's a big car, so you probably have to.
I have to undo my seatbelt and like crawl across. Yeah. So it's a luxury when I rent a car, and even if it's the crappiest econo box, like you're saying, as power locks, power windows, like all these fantastic new features.
Oh my God. Doug, if I borrow your truck to move my couch, I'm going to stick my younger child in there and have her show her what life used to be like when we were children.
It's different. Yeah, there are seat belts in there though, because I know when growing up, sometimes the back seat didn't have seat belts, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
the front would just have a lap belt. Yeah. Who cares if your head hits the steering wheel?
Yeah. So moving into the new versus used argument, and I mentioned I bought my truck used, and it was just about to go out of warranty, and a lot of the depreciation was out of the way at that point. So, the new cars, of course, are a lot more potentially more reliable and safe. So that was one of the factors when my wife upgraded to that CRV. Her car was, getting a little older, and we thought, we're going to keep it for a while. We'll go ahead and buy something new. But yeah, what's your take on some of the new versus used?
Yeah. So one thing I thought about on the way over here to record with you today, Doug, is we got a loan on our Mazda when we bought it, but we didn't have to. We went in there and we're like, hey, we'll pay cash. Well, what's your best deal? Da, da, da. And the guy's like, well, you could pay cash, but we're offering 0% financing right now. And I'm like, done. So if you could buy a new car and you get that kind of financing, and I don't think the same deal may be available to you for a used car. So I know the FI camp is big in the used car camp, but the other thing I've noticed recently, especially during COVID, is used car prices have gone up a lot, and they're not the same. You'll probably still save a little bit if you buy a new one, but I'm not necessarily in the you must buy a used car camp. I think if you could get a new one at 0%, and you're going to keep it forever, I think there might be a little bit of value in there. The other thing is, I can think of two examples of this in my personal life, is there's a lot of people who, the first thing I do when I buy something, a TV or a car, is I break out the manual and I read the thing. Like I'm probably the one human in the world who reads that 219-page car manual. And I look at the maintenance thing, and I actually print the thing out and put it on my garage. But there were two people in my life who didn't know that you had to change the oil on a car. And I don't know where these people come from, because I thought that was just basic knowledge. But one actually had the engine seize up after like 27,000 miles of ownership, or I don't know how many he actually got out of before the engine seized up. And you hear about it. It's called a sludge, because your oil will transform into this other thing called sludge, and then your engine will just die. So I kind of worry about that. And there's ways to mitigate that with buying a used vehicle. Just ask for service records, especially if the thing has been maintained. The dealership they maintain it at, which is probably an error, but great if you're buying the used car. Dealerships cost a lot of money, but the dealership will have a record and you can verify that. But if you buy a new car, you're going to have that thing your entire life, its entire life, and you'll know exactly what has happened to it or what hasn't happened to it. And if you can get that 0% financing, all the better. What's your thought on used versus new, Doug?
I think, yeah, kind of what you said. I mean, not too long ago, I guess it's been a few years now, my dad bought a new Explorer, and exactly what you said, 0% financing, and why not do it? He wanted to get a new Explorer, bells and whistles. And, at some point you don't have to be as stringent and strict on yourself. And if you enjoy a new car and you want to be the first one sitting in it, that makes sense to me. If it's important to you, that makes sense to me. That said, I mean, I do like the idea of getting rid of the depreciation and like getting essentially a pretty new car that maybe has like less than 50,000 miles on it. Like that makes sense to me too. And I think especially depends on what you're used to, right? So I have this old truck, no power locks, no power windows. If I got a car that was used and it had 50,000 miles and it was a reasonable trim line, it would feel so luxurious compared to what I'm driving. So it depends on what you're used to. I bought the CRV new. So we bought that brand new. My wife kind of wanted to treat herself. And this was around the time when it was like 2011. So dealerships were active online. It was easy to sort of like look and see inventory. So we lived in the Atlanta area, big metro area, a few million people, a lot of car dealerships, tons of them. So we scoped out, the story is how we bought a new car, and it was pretty enjoyable. So
said no one in the history of the world.
Right. So I turned it around, and I think at this point in time, I was thinking, all right, I don't necessarily like to negotiate, but like, is there a way that we can do this to make it work? So it was really fun. So we scoped out exactly what we wanted, the trim line, and we knew what we wanted. We knew we wanted a new vehicle. So it removed any variables of a used car in different quality or mileage or whatever. So new car, specific trim line, pretty common one. I went online and contacted each of these dealerships. Say it was about 12 of them, because there's a lot of them. So contacted them, let them know exactly what I wanted, told them I wanted to be contacted by email. I didn't want them to call me. I told them I was contacting all the dealerships in the area and that they should get back to me within, say, 24 hours with their best deal. And there's not going to be many rounds. We have cash. We're going to pay for the car. We're buying a car very soon. And if you call me, you're out. If you don't follow the rules, you're out. So I let them know that they're competing against the other Honda dealerships in the area. So some of them didn't get back. Some people called me, and again, they're out. We ended up with 2 or 3 that had competing offers. I let them know, hey, you're in the top running. Come back with your best offer. I'm not going to go back and forth. So it kind of removed any of the BS of like sitting with a car salesman and a car salesman that's like going back to the manager, checking to see what they can do, and just kind of jerking you around and wasting your time. So at that point, we had cash or whatever we were going to pay. We didn't want them to consider anything. We had a trade-in, but we didn't want to tell them about the trade-in. So they had very little information other than we wanted to buy a car. They had it in stock and they were competing. we also knew the trade-in value from like CarMax if we were going to go take the old car that we were trading in. So we had all of the information that we needed. Okay. So I'll pause here. Do you have any questions so far?
My one question for you is, did you know what you should pay for it beforehand? I know you can look at the invoice price, but then there's things called holdbacks, which is money the manufacturer gives back to the dealership for the sale of a car. So did you research any of that before you purchased it?
We may have known the invoice type price, but I don't recall the terminology of a holdback.
Okay.
So I don't think we investigated that. No.
Okay.
So that said, so people do that, like understand the holdback, because that could be pretty valuable too. I think I was hoping, I think I knew something like that existed, but I was hoping through the competition that it would flush it down, because I know they have to make a little bit of money, right?
Sure.
I understand that. So we identified this dealership, and we basically like had everything in line. We agreed on a price before we even went down there. So again, removing any of these variables, because we didn't want to drive across town and then have to go to another dealership and all that stuff. So we had it all lined up. Once we sat down and started getting out paperwork for the sale, then we told them, hey, well, we have a trade-in here. And they're like, oh, you didn't tell us about the trade-in. Oh, good grief. So they had to factor that in. They lowballed us. And we said, you know what? We need at least this amount, because we know we can go to CarMax and trade it in for this. So they're starting to get pissed off along the way here. So we didn't need any of their financing, another area that they could make money. We had the trade-in that we told them about at the last minute. So that kind of screwed up some of their other variables too. And by the end, they were upset with us, and they didn't like us, and we got the car, and it was fantastic. So I think we win, right? If you make the car dealership upset and they don't want to work with you anymore, like you've done a good job. Now, the one thing that came up there that kind of surprised us, when you sit down to buy a car, even if you're not getting a loan, they run a credit check on you. And I'm like, what the fuck? We have the money. Like we could, and they're like, no, we have to do it. And maybe it's something you could push back on. But at that point of the day, we're like, all right, fine. We'll give you our social security numbers so you can run a credit check. But, and maybe actually if people know if that's bullshit, like I'd be interested. But yeah, we were not borrowing money. They were like, oh, we have to do it for some other thing. So
I have heard of that before. They allow you to test drive the car. Did you test drive it, or
we did. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard dealerships make you do that if you want to test drive it. I don't know if it's just maybe their insurance company requires. Like, what would they do if you had really? Okay. But I wonder, what would they do if they pulled the credit and it was really shitty? Would they just not let you test drive it at that point, or so? Yeah, I don't know.
Interesting. Yep. So that's how we got the new car, and I mean, we'll probably drive that Honda for potentially 10, 15 more years. It only has 100,000 miles on it right now.
Yeah.
So
okay, cool. Yeah, I think that brings us to our next point. Well, I guess before we get to that, I'm trying to think if I had to buy a new car, what I would do. And when we did buy cars, we did something similar to you. We knew exactly what we wanted. I don't think I was as strict as you. We probably paid more than you. Next time I'm going to hire you to purchase my car. But we knew exactly what we wanted, especially with the Element. Mindy wanted an orange one, and we wanted a stick shift, and we wanted a certain trim level. And they had some inventory checker, and there was like, we had to drive like 120 miles to get the stupid thing. So we probably lost some negotiating leverage there, but we did the same thing. We did everything online, and I don't like talking to people on the phone. I'm like, yeah, here's my email. Can you please just email us back with your best offer? It was still frustrating. You get there and they've got the guy in the back room. What do they call it? The finance and I guy. What does the I stand for? I can't remember, but I don't know if you went through this with your CRV, but they try to sell you all kinds of undercoatings and floor mats and all kinds of bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
Those things are pure profit at that point.
Yep. And I mean, I have gotten I've become more of an asshole as I've gotten older. Maybe that's a natural progression, but as they're trying to sell that stuff, I just cut them off. I'm like, I'm not going to buy any of this stuff. Like, stop asking these questions. So I'm like more rude.
Yep.
And I'm the customer, right? So don't make this a hassle. So I'm much more abrupt. And in fact, a whole other story, we'll talk about housing, I'm sure, at some point, but we bought this house new, and everyone is a salesperson along the way until you hit the warranty person, and they present themselves as not salespeople, but helpful individuals. And, if I end up buying a new home again, I'm going to be one of the worst people to deal with, because I've just been jerked around, and I see like, oh, here's my leverage points. I made a mistake at this spot previously. And I made some mistakes buying cars in the past where, they would like, well, you really do need that rust proof undercoating, whatever. And I was like, oh, well, it does buy peace of mind, hate for that undercarriage to rust. I mean, we don't, So anyway, those people exist.
Yeah. Did they get you to buy the extended warranty or anything like that when you got the CRV?
No.
Okay.
No.
Good.
Yeah,
I was hoping that would be your
No,
answer.
I never get any of those extended warranties.
Yeah. And this is a kind of life philosophy of mine. Like, I want to buy a quality product up front, and then I'll take care of it. So I would never have to use any warranty at all. Like, either of our two cars that we bought new, we never even used the warranty that came with the car. I mean,
yeah. And half the time, anytime I've had like some warranty that I've added or whatever, they don't cover anything that you actually would need, or they're just going to cover a portion of it, and then maybe the parts, but the labor is like 90% of the cost. So, and not specifically with cars, but just warranties typically are a big hassle.
Yeah, they're all bullshit, like you said. Anything that goes wrong, funny how that works out, is not covered, or it breaks the month after the warranty ends.
Yeah.
So let's talk about cars. So what the audience should be asking now is, if they were to ask us what kind of car they should buy, what we would say. And before we do that, I want to tell you a little story how I learned all the bad words in life. My parents were big Buy American people too. And Detroit had some dark days, and my parents would buy these old used things. The one I remember the most was the Chevy Citation, which was, do you remember that car, Doug? Or?
I know the name, but
Google, there was not the high period for Detroit engineering. And my dad would be working on these cars probably every other weekend under the hood, just yelling swears. We'd be in the house and we'd hear, I think the garage was like a megaphone amplifying his profanity, like coming out like, oh, that's interesting. My mom actually told me my first word was the F word, and it came when my dad was working on one of our beaters. Now, in play company, she'll tell people my first word was car, but apparently in real life it was fuck, because my dad said it, and then I instantly repeated it. But the point I'm going to make now is, and this alludes to something you mentioned earlier, is American cars are great now. All cars are pretty much the same quality. They learned their lesson. The Japanese came in with quality cars, oil embargo. And now I would expect any modern car, any car you can buy that's made within the past 5 or 6 years, to go for 200,000 miles with good maintenance and not costing you a fortune. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Agree 100%. Yeah. And I think American cars did have some, crappier years, and, must have been like in the late 60s, the 70s, and maybe early 80s. But yeah, I don't know how, I don't have an expectation for my truck. I think the challenging part would be if I actually drove it another 100,000 miles or so. I think it could probably handle it. And I mean, the one thing with the F-150, it's a platform and engine that has been around for a pretty long time. So they worked out the kinks. I think one thing to look out for, let's say Ford comes out with some, or fill in the blank, any company comes out with some new engines, the first few years may be a little rough. They're not sure how it's going to handle, years of driving. So the platform of the 2005 F-150, it's been around for a little while. So,
Yep.
Yeah. most cars are going to go, what'd you say, 200,000 miles?
Oh,
So,
easily. Like even a lowly Kia Optima, whatever the hell the cheapest Kia is, to a fancy car. Any car should go 200,000 miles now. So you can't go wrong with pretty much any car. So, well, I won't say that. The irony to this whole thing is a lot of times the most expensive luxury cars actually are the most expensive to own. The parts are going to cost more, and the maintenance is going to be a little bit more. I've got a friend who owns a Porsche, and it's pretty new. A beautiful car, great car. No knocks on Porsche, but to take that thing to the dealership to have regular maintenance done is astronomical. And I know some of the Euro brands and oil change can cost $200 because of the way they do it. Like, no, thank you.
wow, that's insane. Well, and then I like road trips and traveling. And if I'm driving around in my old truck, I can pretty much roll into any garage in the country. They're going to be able to fix it. There's nothing weird going on. It's one of the most common cars on the road, trucks on the road. And if you show up with a Porsche and you're in the middle of nowhere in South Dakota, North Dakota, wherever, right? Somewhere remote, you may have a little trouble getting them to do anything on your car. So that's another sort of
there's definitely something to that.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of the I call it the MVP, the minimal viable product. You use that term in software too, but for cars too. And I started thinking about this right when I first met Pete, AKA Mr. Money Mustache, our Longmont neighbor. We were talking about cars and he asked me how I like the Mazda. I'm like, well, it's pretty great, but in the mountains, it really sucks. Like I'm the guy in the right lane doing 45 and the engine's spinning like crazy and that's as fast as it'll go. And he's like, well, that's actually a pretty good thing. And I'm like, well, why is that? He's like, well, do you drive in the mountains often? I'm like, no, hardly ever actually. He's like, well, it's perfect for the driving you do. You're mostly commuting with it. You're driving around town. So it's ridiculous to have something with a huge engine. Sorry, Doug, a V8. Yeah. When the percentage of driving that thing would actually be valuable is like 1 or 2% versus your daily driving. If you're driving a V8 to King Soopers, the grocery store every day, you're just wasting a lot of fuel. So you should get the car that does what you need it to do and nothing more. And I think there's a lot of value to that.
Yes, I agree. It is a little wasteful to have a V8 to go to the store down the street. So,
damn, Doug is. Oh man, this might be our last podcast.
I know. Well, and I think maybe we could hook it up where Pete and I debate why it's good for me to have a V8 truck. So I think I'll lose, but that could be an interesting conversation.
And again, it'll actually enhance your community because everyone needs to know someone who has a pickup truck, and that person better like you, which you might not anymore after this conversation, but I hope you still do. And I hope it'll haul my couch. And one tip, if you ever borrow your friend's car, fill it up with gas. Like that's the least you can do. That's a dick move not to.
Yeah. And it's more expensive for my truck. It's like a 23 gallon tank. So
yeah,
I really appreciate it a lot when you fill it up.
But Doug, I will fill your car up with gas after I haul my couch. After eating, not even before. So
are you really getting a couch?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, this seems really specific, and you could borrow it. That's cool.
Appreciate that.
All right. So MVP, you got this 4-cylinder. It does the job 99% of the time.
Yeah. Get something that's safe. Get something that's modern. Most new cars are safe too. Every car has 1 million airbags in it now. They're not the death traps that they used to be. So people often throw that out there as an excuse. I need my mega yacht for safety. I don't want to be in an accident. And that is true. A Ford Expedition is going to be a lot safer than a Mini. On the other hand, a Mini is a lot easier. I like to look at the maneuverability and avoidance of accident in the first place. Mm-hmm. Doing things like snow tires and things like that. But even a Mini is going to be safe. With that said, I would not want to get into a head-on collision with your F-150. So you score one for you, Doug.
Yeah. All right. So you have some favorites for your MVP for different applications.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what you hear of these or if you have a differing opinion. So a lot of my neighbors have a Nissan Leaf, and that's actually an electric car, but electrics are really nice because they're very simple. There's nothing to maintain on it. And you're not even going to have to do the brakes on it because when you hit the brake pedal or let off the gas, and a lot of them nowadays, gas is the wrong word, let off the electrons. I don't know what the term is. So what happens is the motor of the car engages and it turns into a generator to charge the battery, and that slows the car. So if you drive an electric car carefully, you're never going to have to do pretty much any maintenance on it. The knock against a Nissan Leaf is they don't have great range. So if you got to drive 100 miles a day, this is not the car for you. But if you just need a hauler to take your kids to school or to get groceries, this is a great car. I really like the ideas of electric. I'm putting solar panels on my roof. I'm going back to my fuel thing. I've spent $18,000 on gas. It's going to cost me less than $10,000. Again, I'm DIYing this, so it's a lot cheaper than if I paid someone, but those solar panels are going to give me free fuel for my future electric car. But yeah, a Nissan Leaf, a great car for short commuting. If you needed to commute longer, I would say get some kind of gas burner, a Civic, or maybe a Camry or an Accord if you want a little bit more space. And for hauling stuff, an old Honda Odyssey, which is what Mr. Money Mustache has, or maybe a Honda Element, I can actually wedge a 4x8 sheet of drywall in there. I can't sit flat like your Mr. Fancy Ford F-150 can do. So you've got that on me, but I can stick it in there. These cars are cheap, especially the Odysseys. Interestingly, the Element has become kind of a cult car. I have people leaving notes on my windshield. This has happened multiple times, offering to buy it, which is kind of strange, but they only made it for a certain amount of time, and now they're a cult thing. So what's your opinion, Doug? What kind of car would you get if you're...
I briefly looked at the Leafs because there's actually quite a lot of Leafs around Longmont here. So I was seeing them more often, and knowing I don't drive a ton, usually it's the short commute. I kind of looked around, and I mean, you can get them on the used market for like under, $8,000-$9,000, not that many miles. People are not going on like really long trips. So yeah, I briefly looked at those, but kind of back to our point, but buying anything new would probably be more expensive than just maintaining what I have now. Now that we've calculated how much it actually costs for me to drive and own my truck, there's a bit of an argument there. But at the same time, like we talk about, you have different values, and I feel good getting into my truck every now and then. Like makes me happy. Yeah. So, but a Nissan Leaf seems like a really solid choice for the kind of driving I do 90% of the time. Now, the other side of that is, I said I like road trips. So I've driven my truck like to and from Montana several times, and then back to Georgia several times too. And with an electric car, obviously you don't have that option.
You do. You just have to sit there for longer while it charges. And
right. Yeah. I think with the Teslas, you can get some much faster charging. And I haven't looked at any of the electric like charging time frames for like a Leaf. But yeah, I suspect you would have to sit around for a while.
Yeah, you would. One thing I want to mention is you're a Ford fan. Have you seen the new Ford Mustang Mach-E? The electric Mustang, which it's more of a crossover vehicle.
No, I haven't. I don't even know anything about it.
Oh, geez. I saw one here yesterday in Longmont. So it's got the name Mustang on it, but it's not a car. It's like kind of like a CRV actually type vehicle.
Oh shit. You know what? I may have seen it. Was it a black one? Is it around here? Like, you saw it on the road, right?
Yeah, I saw it on the road. I've seen a blue one and a white one. If you look at the grill, they have a solid grill, so you'll know exactly that it's something weird you're looking at when you see it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. That's cool.
That could be a future solution for you, Doug.
Get me out of that V8.
No, I like your V8, Doug. I take everything I said back. I take it all back, and like I said, I've got a couch I need to haul. But let's talk about the future of transportation a little bit, because this is kind of fascinating. I probably pay attention to this stuff a little bit more than Doug, but a lot of people, like a lot of big tech, is working on autonomy, which are cars that drive themselves. I think the New York Times broke the article. This is probably 5 or 6 years ago now, but there were these strange cars driving around Silicon Valley with these big spinning things on top. And the New York Times comes out with this article that says, hey, Google is working on a car that could drive itself. And since then, Tesla started to work on this, and I know a lot of the Chinese companies like Baidu and there's a Russian one, Yandex. I'm sorry if I'm butchering these names, but they're all working on autonomous cars. And when this story first broke, I remember reading that the Google guy in charge of it, I forget his name now, was like, yeah, this is going to be out in like 4 years. And it's been over 4 years now. And I actually don't think they're that close. But someone will figure it out. And I have a feeling they'll figure it out maybe around 2025. And what this means is, let's back up a second. If you take an Uber or Lyft now, the number one expense is the driver, is the human behind the vehicle. So once you eliminate the driver, the trip becomes way cheaper. So what's going to happen when autonomous cars come online is it's going to be far cheaper to just use a robotaxi to pull up an app on your phone. Hey, car, I need to go to King Soopers. The car will say, okay, I'll be there in 5 seconds. This car with no one in it shows up. You jump in the back. It drops you off. You're done shopping. You call up another car. It picks you up and drives you home. It's going to be a lot cheaper to do that than to actually own a car. So I wonder, and there's going to be people who always want to own cars, but there's a Stanford professor who talks about this named Tony Seba. He said when robotaxis come online, it's going to be 10 times cheaper to take a robotaxi than it will be to own a car. And whenever something is 10 times cheaper in society, that thing always ends up dominating, and it happens pretty quickly. So I wonder if we're at the end of car ownership and this, in 5 years, we'll be pulling this podcast because it won't be relevant anymore. It'll be longer than 5 years, but.
Yeah. I didn't know that sort of economic formula, 10 times cheaper and so on, but I could see that being really convenient because, I mean, I have my truck out of convenience, not out of necessity. I don't commute anymore. I haven't in years, which is why the mileage is so low and I just don't drive much. But not having to worry about it, no insurance, no fuel, all those details. Occasionally, doing a road trip, you're going to have to figure some other solution out. But yeah, the convenience of calling up a robo-taxi seems fantastic.
Yeah, especially if you're in an urban environment where you'll have to pay hundreds of dollars to park your car and pay a lot more for insurance because accidents are more frequent. And in those kind of environments, people are more used to taking the subway or a taxi or whatever anyway. So I really do think this is the future. I think Musk talked about it being out like in 2017 or 2018, and here we are in 2021. And I think they're closer now, but still nowhere near close to widespread development. Like I said, if I had to say a date, 2025 for maybe full level 5 autonomy that can drive in snow and all these edge cases. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope it comes sooner because driving my children to school every day and picking them up is a pain in the ass. And I'd like the car to do that. But Doug, with that said, I hope you keep your truck at least until I get my couch.
Get the couch. Yeah, it'll be around for a little while. Yeah.
Awesome.
Very good. Any other thoughts on cars or transportation in general?
Yeah. So one big closing thought. So in the fire community, people always debate all these different expenses. Like if I just didn't buy a latte every day, or if I stopped going out to lunch, blah, blah, blah. And I think all those arguments are kind of stupid and you're kind of looking at the wrong thing. The two things you really have to get right if you really want to fire is housing and cars. We'll talk about housing at some future point, but cars can be a huge expense. If you buy a new car now, you're going to be saddled with a payment probably $500 or $600 a month, which you pointed out that great example how much money that can turn into in just 10 years. And you're also going to be saddled with higher maintenance costs, higher insurance costs. So there's a lot of value in keeping a car for a long period of time.
Yeah. And that said, probably most powerful leverage points, housing and automobile. You don't have to have it perfect though. So I have a foreclosure in my history and I have a truck that is not optimized for value in any capacity. So you don't have to get everything perfect. You just have to get a few things right most of the time, which I think in life, that's probably pretty close. No one's going to get everything perfect, but just don't mess up too bad.
Yeah. Don't mess up too bad. And if you just have that 4-cylinder Honda Civic and you go out and buy a couch, just when you need to bring that couch home, rent a pickup truck or keep, I think there's a famous Shakespeare quote, which I think about often, keep good friends close. And I'll modify that. Keep good friends with pickup trucks close. once in a while, I'll bring them a steak, which I'm going to do for Doug and May, maybe as partial payment for his truck. But yeah, have a fun with a pickup truck or join a co-working space that has a trailer.
Yeah, there's a few solutions for it. So awesome, man. This is a good episode.
Yeah, thanks, Doug.
We'll catch you on the next one. Oh, you know what? Before we go, I even put notes on here, but we forgot to tell you to join the MHFi Club. That's our email list. Good grief. I put these bright Post-it notes on here and we still blew right past it. Next episode, we're doing it in the first third. All right. We got to remember. So this is our email list. We'll send out things we're thinking about. We'll let you know about episodes that are coming out soon. And occasionally coming up, we will ask for questions that we'll answer live. Anything else that we do in the email list?
Yeah, no, I think that's about it. Does membership in the MHFi Club come with use of a pickup truck for when you have to haul your couch? It doesn't.
No, you're potentially eligible for thinking about it, but that's about it.
Yeah, we will have a pickup truck giveaway, but that'll be in 10 years from now when Spotify has paid us $100 million for the podcast like they did with Joe Rogan.
Yeah, either there's some kind of crazy inflation going on or Spotify has made some weird choices. All right. To join the MHFi Club, no truck borrowing included.
MHFi Club? No, MHFi.club.
Yes, that's right. There's a link in the show notes and description. I saw that you have been doing some work on your house. What's been going on?
I have, and Doug, that's correct. And I'm wearing this long sleeve thing for a reason, and it's because if I were to take my sleeves up, you'd see paint all over my arms, and I didn't want you to think that I had some kind of communicable disease. So if you see spots on my arm, it is paint. It is not. I am not diseased in any way that I know of.
That's good. What are you working on?
I am painting my house. My house was built in the late 70s, and it was never updated since then. So much of it still looks like that. It's got all this dark paneling and dark wood, and we didn't know quite what to do with it for the longest time. So my first idea was to tear it down and put new stuff up, but that's a whole lot of work, and I've got a lot of work to do. So we tried to think of an easier solution. So what we came to is to prime all that old nasty wood, prime it white, and then we do what's called I don't know if whitewash is the right term, but what you basically do is you take gray paint and then you thin it down with water. So it's 2/3 water, 2 parts water, 1 part paint, and then you brush it on the wood. And it's got a pretty neat effect. Even though it's been primed, it still looks like wood grain. So the effect is it looks like you stain the wood. So instead of having old nasty 1970s brown, we have a more modern gray. I was thinking the other day, it's probably just about the time that what I'm doing right now is about to go out of style and that brown will come back in. But
that would fit your timing.
It would fit my timing. But even if that happens, I like the current look a lot better. So I'm going to stick with it. Next time you're at our house, I'll show it to you. It's been a long time, COVID.
I know. It's been a while. It's been like you had the beer thing like last summer and we were outside to be a little safer.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, that's right. If you're around Memorial Day weekend, we were planning a party at that time.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're going to be around. Yeah.
It is a pool party, Doug, and I know this might differ from your norms, but bathing suits are required, Doug. There might be children there, so I know how you usually operate.
That's true. That's true. Well, it'll give me an excuse to get in shape, so that sounds good. Are there certain constraints on the swimsuits or like Speedos are in, right?
Well, there weren't before, but now that you mention it, I'll have to revisit the clothing policy. This party will be live streamed on the internet.
There's some sort of code of conduct. All right, let's check the sound now.